Testament scholars argue that First Timothy is a forgery, and that is, that someone is using Paul's name for authority of some sort. A New Testament scholar, Bar Ehrman, details a verse in Second Thessalonians where Paul warns his readers not to be led astray in his letter. And then it says, quote, as if by us. So Bart uses this as a reason to think that Paul knew other letters that forged his name onto these kinds of letters. One way this argument is placed is compare Paul's vocabulary and theological distinctions on letters that we know he wrote, such as Romans, with his other letters that are debated, such as First Timothy and Titus, and you'll see a lot of differences. One important detail mentioned is the views of women. Regarding this idea, reading Paul speak of women, let's say in Romans or in First Corinthians, Paul sees them as a major part or role of the church. However, it is argued that in First Timothy, the views on women is that they are second-class citizens at best, and you could even look into that verse even worse. 2 Timothy 2 verse 12 through 15. So that's a difficult idea as well that many scholars look at to show that this may not have been a Pauline letter. So First Timothy focuses on church structure and organization. So some think that this letter was written against competing Gnostic ideas or theories with Jesus and so forth. And so if these Gnostics were doing this, this would also show that this would be a very troubling thing for early Christianity and others trying to date this book to Paul's day, because the Gnostics really didn't even come about until the late first century, late first century, early second century. So if that's true, it couldn't have been written by Paul, because Paul died somewhere around 62 AD, as we're told in secular sources. So scholars like Ehrman conclude that First Timothy was forged, and may have been because of some kind of religious or church agenda of some sort. However, there are scholars on the other side that argue against such views. One way that scholars do this is they just say, well, the first things first is that just because the vocabulary and theological distinctions are just a smidge difference, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was written by someone else. For example, we all can think of examples where, let's say, a boss or supervisor addresses his team members differently than he would, let's say, another supervisor of some sort. And it could be said the same way here. Maybe Paul addresses things quite differently. So that's at least an option, but it's difficult to say if this is the best option. But if there are scholars such as N.T. Wright that argue for First Timothy's authenticity, or at least hinting towards it, and some people will even argue for the early church fathers. Authors like Clement of Alexandria mention that Paul did write First Timothy. So it's things like this that these people will conclude that maybe we do have reason to think that Paul wrote it. Others even will even go to another length. They'll say the internal evidence of the letter, comparing it to the other, like let's say the book of Acts, is another way to kind of go about showing that Paul wrote it. So that's really the main thing. Oh, there is one other thing I could say on this as well. The difference in vocabulary and theology is explained under this hypothesis as Paul and his aging and his views may be changing as well. So there's so many different ways you can go about it if you still want to accept that Paul actually did write First Timothy. But the difficult thing is that the majority of scholars do not think Paul wrote it. I don't know if there is a consensus on who they think may have wrote it, but I know they say that it certainly wasn't Paul. But let me know what you think down below, whether or not you think Paul wrote it or some other individual, and how you feel about these discussions and how it affects maybe views on inerrancy and stuff of this sort. So let me know down below, and thank you for watching this video. Like and subscribe for more content like this.